Hi, I'm Deb.
This is Frankie V.
I'm Grant.
Hi, this is Phil.
I'm Aaron.
I'm Steven.
Hi, I'm Joe.
Hi, I'm Matt.
We're Tim and Terry.
I'm Susan.
Hi, this is Phil.
Seminary Dropout is supported by listeners like you and me.
Seminary Dropout is supported by listeners like you and me.
You should support the show like I did.
It's easy.
It's easy.
Just visit supportseminarydropout.com.
Just go to supportseminarydropout.com.
And I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. Interviews with leading Christian authors, leaders, and thinkers. Let's go. Well, my guests today are Ben Sternke and Matt Tebbe. Ben and Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
Thanks, Shane. It is good to be here.
Why don't you, for the audience who doesn't maybe know who you are, tell a little bit about who you are, what you're about, what you do.
Well, I'll introduce Ben.
And
you introduce me. How's that?
All right.
I
wasn't prepared for this, but
Ben is a father of 4, been married at least 20 years, probably more.
That's usually my answer too. I can't remember.
He co-founded Gravity Leadership. He co-founded The Table, both 7 years ago. And the joy of his life is his 6.5-pound dog, Edith, who has more outfits than he does.
That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not much. So, thanks, Matt. Matt Tebbe is a male model and hand model.
Knuckle.
Particularly the knuckles.
It's very specific.
That's,
Very niche.
He's got great knuckles. Great knuckles.
Once every 7 years, I get a gig in Slovakia. It's great.
No, Matt also co-founded Gravity and The Table. The Table's our church here in Indianapolis. Gravity is the organization that we started to coach and train Christians to center their lives in the love of God and their leadership. And Matt lives in the Indianapolis area. Matt's got 2 kids. Mm-hmm. Their ages, I'm going to guess here, 13 and 10. They're 13 and 10.
Close, but you're around my kids multiple times a week. 14 and 10.
14 and 10.
Close,
hey, look at there. Yeah, I was super close. Traditionally, I'm bad at guessing kids' ages, but I feel pretty good about that one. And been married to Sharon for 21 years.
Close.
How's that? 20 some years?
It's been 22, but it's been such bliss.
But
it's been
feels
so blissful.
Like 21.
It just feels like 21.
So that's Matt. Matt also has a dog. I wouldn't call this dog the what did you say my dog was?
The joy of your life.
The joy of my life. But it is a wonderful dog named Jovi. It's a big Cocker Spaniel.
No, she's not.
Oh, sorry. No, I was thinking of my dog, Golden Retriever.
Thank you. Yeah.
For some reason, I conflate those kinds of dogs in my head. We had a Cocker Spaniel.
I think I overestimated how much you know about me, Ben.
Yeah, sorry. You got to give me a heads up. So, anyway.
Anywho.
I think every time I interview more than one person, I'm going to have them only introduce each other and not themselves from now on.
It's pretty entertaining.
That's a pretty good party trick you guys just did. It's pretty great. I know a lot of guys who they don't know their own children's ages, so I'll give Ben a pass.
Yes.
Yeah, come on.
Vaguely aware of some small humans living in the house.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people probably know you guys from the Gravity Leadership podcast. It's been going on for several years now and really fantastic. I said one time, let me say this. When I think I knew you guys before I knew Gravity Leadership. And when I heard the name Gravity Leadership, I was like, all right. I mean, that's where you want to take this. Because when I think of leadership, I think of 21 laws of leadership type leadership stuff,
Yeah, sure.
And I gave the podcast a try because I thought, I like these guys. How bad can it be? And it has quickly become one of my favorite podcasts. I really appreciate how there's a real aim. With my podcast, it's what am I into this week, and it's all over the place. With yours, I feel like there's a real telos going on. You're taking us somewhere on this journey, and I've always really appreciated that. So you guys know this. I have been a part of a Gravity Leadership cohort that you know, as a part of Gravity Leadership. And then I've taken that, the material, and I've led two different groups of guys at my church through the Gravity Leadership stuff. So I'm pretty familiar. You could call me a fan. And it's funny because I had always wondered, like, are they going to make this into a book that, you know, a traditional book? You've got the workbook that we go through. And here it is. You've done it. Having the mind of Christ, 8 axioms to cultivate a robust faith. I'm not getting it in the shot there. There it is. How did the axioms come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll take a stab at this. We were coaching people without axioms. And Shane, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of being misinterpreted or feeling like you're talking past somebody, or you say something and they completely miss what you meant, or you go 20 or 30 minutes in a conversation and you realize, oh man, we were working from totally different assumptions. Well, we kept coming on in these disconnects in our coaching, where, for instance, we had people who operated from this just assumption. It wasn't even named, but it just kept showing up, popping up, like, you know, we live in this 2-story universe, and we are here on earth, and God's in heaven, and we need to figure out a way to get God to show up. And if we can get God to show up, then God things can happen. But most of the time, we're kind of on our own, and we're hoping that he, like, you know, we're praying for, like, you know, the scraps from his table that maybe they'll, you know, rain down like a zap here and there. And no one, most of the people who live life with that imagination, you know, they didn't like raise their hand and accept that into their heart at some point. It just sort of lives there, you know? And we just started recognizing these beliefs, we can maybe call them deep agreements that people have made that they don't even know they've made. And once they were excavated and named, we're like, oh gosh, that was so helpful to get that on the table, right? And man, what if we kept track of these things that seem to interrupt or thwart our best intentions at discipleship? What if we kept track of them and then maybe evaluated them with, like, well, how did Jesus see the world or see people? And so the axioms emerged just from us trying to discipleship people more faithfully, better, more effectively. And then we put them together. They were really helpful to name for people. And then we decided to unpack them and put them in this book.
I think what's interesting about that is that you kind of, you came to these by figuring out or hearing what's wrong. Like, you kind of discovered the anti-axioms and then said, well, then what's the truth here, right? Like, if we live in this 2-story world and we're like, we think God's got to show up and we know that's not true, then the truth is God is always present and at work.
Yeah, I think it's the way that we stumbled into a lot of stuff that we do now through Gravity, is just by kind of bumping our noses against glass doors, you know, not realizing there were issues until we realized there's issues. And then we're like, well, wait, what is this? And what do we need to be clear about here? And so the axioms emerged as not like doctrines you learn, but more like paradigms that you learn to inhabit, even though there's some of them are related to doctrines, right? I mean, God's omnipresence, right? For example, God is always present at work. So, but we found that from a paradigm level, it's possible for you to assent to some doctrine while also living your life as if God is somewhere else for most of your life.
You know, I was thinking, especially as I was reading your the introduction to the book, there's been historically like such a, and by historically, I mean like in the last 50 years in white America, like an overemphasis on doctrine and right belief. And I feel like we're kind of trying to course correct and kind of pay a little bit of attention to our orthopraxy as well, like the things that we do and our habits. And, you know, it's been said that we don't so much believe our ways into right behavior, but behave into right beliefs. I'm probably butchering that. And I love all that, and I'm thankful for all that. I feel like something you're doing is saying yes, but there's actually a step before this. Whereas if we go into the beliefs, but our belief is about a messed up God, then that actually won't help us into the right behaviors and beliefs. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I hear what you're saying, Shane. I think, one of the things we want to keep, one of the parts about our training, this because you've been through it, is that there is a sense in which discipleship has to be more about belief and behavior. And so I'm thankful as well that we're started talking about orthopraxy as well. But I think there is a diving below the surface that needs to happen to say it's not just about sort of checking the right doctrinal boxes or checking the right behavioral boxes, but that there's something more to being a human than thinking things and doing things. And so the work that we're trying to do with paradigms is learn to inhabit our bodies, the way that our bodies navigate the world. And that's more than behavior. That also has to do with desire. It has to do with relationships. It has to do with, a sense of communion with others and with God. And so I do think that what we're trying to do is to point out the fact that you can't just add some good behaviors to your good doctrine and really lean into this thing called the Christian life, that there is something more required, that we have to dive into the depths of our own souls. We have to discover what we want and have to learn how to name those things. And I think as we do that, as we learn how to be honest and give ourselves permission to be honest about those things, I think then we begin to discover how we actually relate to God. And that can be a huge stepping stone for a lot of people in their spiritual journey, is to just get honest about that stuff.
I think a lot of us who grew up in evangelicalism have come around to discover a more contemplative tradition. And I think that what I'm seeing is it doesn't do me a lot of good to spend a lot of time in contemplative meditation or silence in an effort to get to know a mean and vindictive God more. It's like it really does. It matters what I believe about this God before I spend time with him, And so it really matters that if I have to be getting to know the God who really makes it all about love, for instance.
Yeah. And this was a pretty scandalous thing for me, Shane, that I realized that I had belief. I had the things I told myself I believed about God, and then I had what I actually believed in my bones about God. And and it really did come down to love. It really came down to do I know how love works, and do I trust that God is love? And for me, the test was and this is one of the exercises in the book, is just notice when I'm aware of my own badness, and that could be saying screw it and doing something wrong, or being foolish and looking embarrassed, or it could be any number of things, right? Some woundedness from my past coming up and me feeling depressed or anxious. How did I experience God in that moment? And for the most part, when I experienced badness, either in me or around me, a God of love wasn't the God I was experiencing. It was a distant God, or a disappointed God, or a God that was losing his patience, or begrudgingly forgiving me, based upon what Jesus did for me, And I realized, man, if love isn't, if my body, if my bones, if my subconscious doesn't know what love is, then it doesn't matter how I define it. It just doesn't matter. What matters is, can I live in love? Can I put on Christ, right? These metaphors that are deeply ontological rather than prefrontal cortex stuff. And so that for me was one of the reckoning moments of, I don't want to just throw ideas at the surface, but I actually want to know something of love on the interior, on who I am, so that when I'm quiet, I can sit in love, right? In the presence of love.
One of the things that you guys say a lot, and this phrase has come to mean a lot to me, is what if I act as if this is true? And I think that that's a real component of faith, at least in my life, is because everything within me may say that my feelings may say that it's not true. But if I can say, man, the testimony, the picture of God as revealed through Christ in Scripture is a very loving God, is a God who puts love in the center. And maybe I don't feel like that's true today, but what if I got up and acted as if it was? If I went through my day just assuming, maybe on faith, that it is true, that this God is about love, then maybe that kind of changes some things for me.
Yeah. That's a phrase that we got from Willard, we owe a huge debt to Willard. Dallas Willard is who I'm talking about, for a lot of the spiritual formation stuff that we've learned. But I think he says in The Divine Conspiracy, to believe something is to act as if it's true. And that has become, like you said, Shane, like a real paradigm for us to say, and it's not quite the same thing as like fake it till you make it. It's sort of like that. But the goal here is not to, it's a bit more gentle, I think, than what a lot of us think of when we think of fake it till you make it. It's not like punching ourselves in the spiritual kidneys until we, like get it right, or like striving really hard to feel differently about God. But it's just a real gentle, one step at a time, and so even maybe saying like, I'm going to live my day as if God is, maybe that's too much. It's like, well, how about just in this situation where I just realized that, like Matt said it earlier. So for example, when I screw up, what if instead of beating myself up, what if I just interrupt that pattern? What if that's not required of me? What if that's not going to help me? What if instead love is and graciousness is available to me? What would it look like for me to receive that, like right now? And then I can make another choice, in another minute, and probably make a few more mistakes. But there's this real gentle sense, and we try to make it very curious and open-hearted, just to say, hey, what would you lose if you just tried to act as if it's true that God, was love? And this is another reason that we always come back to, we try to bring these conversations they don't happen in the abstract. So in our training, they're very concrete. And so we train people to recognize, this, Shane, we train people to recognize what we call kairos moments. Just like, here's where I'm noticing something going on for me. And so it's not just, how do I believe that God is love in the abstract? But how do I learn to notice what's happening in my own life, in my own feelings, my desires, my relationships, my frustrations, the things that make me angry, the things that bring me joy? How do I learn how to pay attention to that and discern and uncover how God is at work in the midst of that, proclaiming good news to me and inviting me to inhabit his kingdom more fully, to more deeply participate in the life that he shares with us? So it's all very concrete. And it's all very sort of one step at a time. And it's all very gentle and curious and open-hearted. It's meant to be.
Well, we've strongly hinted at the first axiom, which is it really is all about love. That's my phrasing of it. I can't remember the exact phrasing.
Yes.
What are maybe your favorite axioms, or the ones that have had the most transformational power for you personally?
Yeah, I would say that, a number of the axioms are about love. Even the ones that don't mention love. For instance, one of the axioms is God, this is me rewording it, right? God really is like Jesus. But I think getting clearer for me on how love works. Shane, you see me talk about how things work a lot in public, And I think it's because we're not talking about what does love mean or how do you define love. But when you talk about how something works, you're talking about that it has a moral logic. It's got a way of being. Inside of love, some things are good that wouldn't be good outside of love. And some things are bad that wouldn't be good outside of love. And maybe that's not the same as, for instance, control. How does control work? Well, some of the ways control works, many of the ways control works is outside of the moral logic of love. And so for me, that's been provocative for me in my parenting, as a husband, as a pastor, as a friend, in my own internal, the things I perpetuate and give space for in my mind, etc. And then I would say one that's really connected to that, the one that we wrote for this book, I don't think it was in the curriculum, Shane, when you went through it, is Axiom 7, that God's love always reckons with power. And I think that in the last 7 years, that's increasingly been presenting itself as something that needs to be named, and I was unable to name it. And Jesus helped me name this, but also, again, people giving feedback and saying, "See this," or "That doesn't make sense to me," or missing people, or finding alignment in surprising places. And so I think those two axioms are really important, transformational for me.
Yeah, I would echo that. And I'd just maybe say that the one axiom that I think I come back to this one again and again. This was just one of the biggest paradigm shifts for me in my whole faith. Was the axiom 2, God is always present and at work, which again, it sort of feels like, well, duh. Like a lot of these axioms feel like duh. And so we're not like, this isn't like new information, but I think the reason that this has been so transformational for me is that one of the things I began to see about the way that I inhabited my faith is that I had assumptions. I didn't realize they were assumptions, but I had assumptions about what God would be doing if God was here, if God was able to use God's power fully. Like there were assumptions I had about that caused me to act and pray and lead in certain ways to try to sort of get God to do something, or get God to prove that, God was here and God was available. And I think this axiom of just the gentle, curious question kept coming back to me. Okay, what if God is here already? What if God is working already? And it's just in ways that I don't perceive and don't realize. Well, then my prayer can change. I can relax a little bit. Usually the thing that I'm afraid of, I don't need to be afraid of. I can just let go of that a little bit. And I can say, my prayer changes to, God, show me how you're at work. I trust you're here, but this is hard, or this is sad, or I hate this, or this is tragic, and you're not doing what I want you to do. But my prayer can change into those prayers of lament. My prayer can change into a prayer of, help me see how you're working here, because here's what I'm experiencing right now.
Yeah, I just had lunch with a friend who's 48 and single, and she is uncovering a lot of anger and sadness that she's single. And for a very long time, outside of her, the churches she's been a part of, and inside of her, the assumption or the question was, God is present at work when you find a spouse. Or God isn't present at work when you love being single and you can just date Jesus, that kind of thing. And what she was been reckoning with is God's present and work in my singleness right now is me having the courage to really face the deep longing I have to be wanted by somebody in marriage and not have it. And I think that part of this axiom too opens up our imagination to, yes, new creation is a sure and future hope when every tear will be wiped away. But sometimes God's presence and work now is not just to wipe away tears, but it's to enable them. It's not just to say, cheer up, chap, you've got other friends when Lazarus dies. You know what I mean? And so I want to make sure that we're naming too that like there's a strong, and this goes into kind of the thing, the living as though it's true, Ben, that you were talking about earlier. There's a strong cultural habit in the evangelical churches, Shane, that you referenced earlier, of what we talk about in the book of spiritual bypassing, where we actually use the Bible to avoid hard things in us and hard things outside of us. And so part of God's presence and work that even an hour ago at lunch I was experiencing with my friend was her reckoning with maybe God's presence and work here is about me telling the truth about my desires and him echoing that in like some longing and mourning, which as we record this, we're in Advent, and so very appropriate for that. So I just want to append that as well. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah. I can remember after the election in 2016, and there was a real contingent of people online saying things like, "Hey guys, God's got this. Like, no need to worry. You know, God's in control."
Mm-hmm.
And I had this vision of like Jesus sweating blood in the garden, and you know, like a middle-class white guy walking up to him and being like, "Hey buddy, God's got this. Like, what's all the fretting for, man? Come on now.
Cheer up, buttercup. Stiff upper lip.
Remember, God's in charge, you know?"
Yeah.
So Jesus shows us how to fret in a way, you know, and gives us permission to be human.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There's so many assumptions like that, I think, that get uncovered when we take this axiom seriously. Where God was, you know, with Jesus in the garden, but it was actually important for Jesus, you know, that wasn't Jesus being insufficient or, you know, insufficiently content or happy or trusting. That was Jesus full of trust, full of faith, engaging with God in that moment, right? Yeah. And that's the thing that, so many of us, like you were saying, in the American church, in the evangelical church, we've just never learned how to do. We've assumed it was a sign of unfaithfulness or a sign of some sort of spiritual deficiency on our part.
One of the axioms that's meant so much to me is that God meets us in our messy reality. And I've actually kind of seen that in a twofold way, and I wonder if the second one you guys didn't truly mean for it to be this way. But the first one is what I think you mean is like in our sin, and even like the really bad sin that we see, like we're not we don't need to like get out of that before God can deal with us. Like if I just get my act together, then maybe I can kind of commune with God, but God actually meets me there. And if he didn't, he would probably never commune with me at all. And then the second way that I think a lot about that is that I often want to live in non-reality, and God won't meet me there. Like I want to kind of live in the fantasy land where things are not as they are. But God wants to meet us in reality, not the fake world that I make up for myself and the things that I choose to believe because they're convenient. You know, if I want to believe that the world is a meritocracy and everything I've gotten is because I'm just so awesome. I feel like that's a kind of turning away from God and God's reality, because I think part of God is being the most real thing. And that's where God is. And when we choose to not live in that, we are choosing to kind of turn away from God and who God is.
Yeah, I mean, I referenced this earlier, Shane, but I think what you're saying is right on, and I think it's something that we don't. I think there's a lot of different influences and reasons why we're not good at that. You know, I remember reading the life of a saint. I think it was John Owen, who was a Reformed saint from I believe, oh gosh, I'm not going to guess the century. Anyway, I remember reading about his life that he had 12 children and 7 of them died before they reached first grade. And I remember, like, this was right when my son was born, about 14 years ago. 14 years ago. And I put the book down, and I remember just having this sense of, like, what would it be like to lose 7 children before the age of 7? And that being present to that kind of suffering, that kind of loss, that kind of grief as just a normal part of life. And, I think all of us suffer. I mean, I lost my father-in-law a month ago. I know many of your listeners who are listening right now are dealing with very real things. But part of the maybe the modern malady that we experience is that we have created a lot of ways to insulate us from suffering. Like I'm sitting, it's 32 degrees outside right now and raining, but I'm in a nice 69 degree room, and I've got my really nice ergonomic chair that helps my back pain. There's just all kinds of ways that aren't even wrong and bad, but then we don't develop out of necessity, out of survival, to meet with God in these dark places that we can't. There's no thermostat to fix this, and I think that our faith isn't as robust. It isn't as hardy as it could be if we had to deal with that. That's one of the things I'm thinking about as you share that.
Yeah. And I'll add too, I think you're right, Shane, that like some of the fantasies that we believe, like you mentioned meritocracy, right? Some of those fantasies are also ways to insulate ourselves from God and from God's presence. And it's not like we have to have a perfect vision of, we all have these probably fantasies, and you don't realize they're fantasies until some life event or some suffering or someone teaching you, or listening to someone's story, until something exposes it. But that's the crux right there, is when something exposes it, do you double down out of fear of the discomfort of changing that story, of believing a different story? Or do you open up to, oh my gosh, I might be wrong about this. I don't know what this means for me. This is deeply uncomfortable for me. And I think one of the reasons this axiom works in the way that you're talking about it, Shane, is that this can be some added confidence that I can lean into this, this discomfort that I'm experiencing as I learn that, meritocracy perhaps is not everybody's experience in America, right? That there's marginalized people who, really can't work hard enough to get all the things that say a white person can get. And so the facing that deep discomfort, I think one of the things that it has helped me to do some of that work is knowing that actually is a holy place, because God sanctifies it with God's presence right there to say, I'm meeting you here in the midst of this. This is actually a beautiful and glorious thing when people repent. It's just because they're learning what's real and learning to live in reality. And so it's a glorious thing because, as you said, God is the most real thing. I hesitate to call God a thing a little bit, but we can be slightly heretical.
Most real reality?
Yes, right?
Yeah, I don't know how to say
okay,
it.
yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
something like that.
Thanks, Shane. I appreciate you rescuing.
Got your back, Ben.
Yeah, no, but I understand what you're meaning. Obviously, that God is real, and God knows that it's a blessed thing to live in reality, even when that reality is uncomfortable, or filled with suffering. That it's actually more blessed to be in that reality because, again, that's where God is.
So, Matt, you mentioned you guys added Axiom 7, God's love always reckons with power. And so I was, paying a special attention to that chapter. And that chapter has a distinction of being one that everyone likes and no one has a problem with at all, which is nice. Good job pulling that off, you guys.
Yeah. It was a great uncontroversial chapter.
This is news to me.
Ironically, the section in there that I don't know if I'd say I had the hardest problem with, but I wrestle with the most is you were talking about the example of how you try to embody that with your children. And that is so that feels so incredibly complex. I think about this all the time. My kids almost never consent to bedtime, and they almost never consent to eating vegetables. And so I wrestle with that, but also like what that kind of represents in the larger thing. Like if we take those paradigms, and I guess I'm wrestling with questions of, is it the amount of power, or is it the kind of power? I've been all over the map with the power thing. Like there was a time you can find recordings of me on my own podcast advocating not voting, and then something happened in 2016 that made me really rethink that. But
yes.
But I just wonder how you have wrestled with that and what that looks like for you.
Yeah. So this chapter was twice as long when we first wrote it, and we had to cut out like 7,000 words, and it was I cried over each letter because there's so much to say here, and there's so many. We have to speak with wisdom here and not knowledge, right? So every child is different, and if love is going to reckon with power, we can't make a list of 12 rules on how to love our kids, and they can't apply to every kid, right? One kid doesn't eat their vegetables because they have a sensory affective disorder in their mouth, and it literally like is nails on a chalkboard to them. Whereas another one is just trying to stick it to you because you didn't buy them Oculus for Christmas, And so, like, why doesn't a kid eat their vegetables, and what's at stake for them? What's going on? But I'll say this: that we say that we have to reckon with power, which means recognize it, discern it, to redistribute and redefine. So let me just take those two like words. Like redistribute means empowering my kids with choice when it comes to what I want them to do. So giving, instead of just overpowering them, powering up, using punishment as leverage to push them towards what I want them to do, coercion. I lean towards more often in most situations, how's that for hedging my bets, that, hey, you can choose not to eat your vegetables tonight. That's your choice. But that choice comes with these consequences. And so you have a choice between these consequences or eating those vegetables, right? And then whatever you decide to do, you own that. That's yours. That's yours, right? And the consequences aren't like, you're grounded for 12 months. The consequences are commiserate to the choice. You know what I'm saying? So I try to make it so that there's, I'm trying to form my child in good, but I want them to have, when they're caught doing something that's wrong, instead of me just inventing a punishment, I say, well, look, do you understand why this can't happen again? Or why this is a violation of our relationship? Or why, right? I want to trust you and I can't trust you anymore, or et cetera, et cetera. What do you think is an appropriate consequence for what you did? I want you to just think about that for 30 minutes, and then let's talk about it. So just even giving my kids some kind of agency in how they are going to rectify a situation that they contributed to screwing up. These are just little pieces, little artifacts of how I'm trying to redistribute the power in the relationship to them when I have to act, like you said, Shane, with some kind of responsibility towards you, You can't just not go to school. You have to go to school, right? How do I redistribute power when that's the relationship? And then redefine is a continual, it's not about green beans, dude. It's not about green beans. What it's about is you've been given a gift. Your body is a gift. And if you just eat jalapeno Cheetos for every meal, this gift is going to break down and you're going to hate your life. And so how do you take care of your body in a way that's, I don't use this word because they're only 14 and 10, commiserate with your gift? So here's what I want. How about, you name 5 vegetables that you absolutely won't eat. And I will not make you eat them. But then here's a list of other vegetables that are good, and you're going to pick 5 that you won't complain about if I make them. Right? So that it's not about green beans or not. It's about you're learning to take care of your body, and you're learning to you're learning to eat what's cooked for you. And I'm not shoving food down your throat that makes you gag. Like for me, that's part of redistributing the power, but also redefining, like, why is this even important to me? And it's not just so you listen to me or so you stop making me angry, right?
Yeah.
Or so we can get on from dinner and do what I want to do, which are all that's not love. But it's because I'm trying to help you grow up into a wise, healthy human being who values good things. So I'm going to try to recruit you into that.
Yeah.
Shane, does that make sense? How that I don't know kind of plays out from time to time?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that most of us, when I do something like when I make my kids help me clean up the house, it would be much more efficient and easier to just do it myself. But the reason we do those things is because we're hopefully making them into the kinds of people that we want them to be, the people who take care of their bodies and take care of their things and, have lives that, honor Christ. And so it's not the thing, it's the thing behind the thing. And I think we can forget that and get into power struggles and that never end well.
I think that's why it's important to this is part of the way that this axiom works, right? Is that sometimes it is about, like, I want this dinner time to be over so I can get to the thing I'm looking forward to doing. Like, sometimes it is an illegitimate use of my power that I have to reckon with, right? So part of the axiom is, like, I'm not always motivated 100% by my child's well-being. As a parent, sometimes I'm very selfish. And part of reckoning with power is asking those questions. Like, why do I care about the green beans? If it truly is just about me, well, then I just repent. I'm like, I'm sorry, buddy. This is totally about me. You don't have to eat the green beans if you don't want to. It's fine. But if it is a pattern, if there's something else at stake here, like, you know what, actually, you do need to learn how to eat well. Well, then we can deal with that as well. But I think that's part of reckoning with our power is learning the ways that how easy it is when we have power to slip into the illegitimate use of that power for our own ends. It's just in small ways, but it's so easy to do. And Jesus teaches us, I think, to reckon with that and say, and to repent, to turn away from that kind of use of power.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, thanks, guys. This was good.
Yeah, Shane, this has been great talking to you, man. It's good just to, sometimes I feel like when I record a podcast with somebody I know, it's just an excuse for, like, an appointment to hang out and see people you like, Right. So I appreciate the chance to just see you and chat with you. And I just encourage listeners, if you're intrigued or interested in what we've been talking about, to pick up the book, Having the Mind of Christ. We wrote it. Mm-hmm. We wrote it for people like you.
Yeah. And if you are interested in the process, we talk about learning to recognize kairoses and finding the ways that God is at work in the concrete, everyday moments of our lives. You can go to gravityleadership.com/academy. It gives you some information about those cohorts that we run. We're always starting them. Try to start one every month or two. And so if you're interested in that, we'd encourage you to check it out.
I will testify. It's incredibly helpful, been transformative for me, and been super transformative for me to take that back to my church and lead other groups through it, to kind of have a shared language. And when we talk, and we can say, hey, what's the bad news there, and what's the good news? And that's been tremendously helpful for us. So, well, that's
super encouraging for us to hear.
Yeah,
Shane.
good to hear.
That's so good. Thank you.
Well, thanks for being on, guys.
Mm-hmm. Great to be with you, bro.
An honor.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Remember, you can find all the show notes for this show and all shows at shaneblackshear.com. Oh, and hey, have you ever thought about starting your very own podcast? I bet you have. And I think you should do it. In fact, I've created a course just for you to teach you everything that I've learned over the last couple of years producing Seminary Dropout. So if you're interested in podcasting and want to learn how, go check out my course. You can go there by typing in podcastingforeveryone.org. And you can get a special discount by typing in the discount code Seminary Dropout, all one word. That'll give you 25% off. So go check it out. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay. Thanks to those that left ratings and reviews on iTunes this week. Remember, that keeps the show front and center. Also, remember, you can find me on Twitter at @beardonabike. That's @beardonabike. Also, I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/ShaneBlackshear123. And remember that Seminary Dropout is listener supported. You can visit supportseminarydropout.com and press Become a Patron. Remember, this music you're listening to right now is by D.L. Rossi. You can find him online on iTunes and at dlrossi.com. All right, thanks again for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Love you. Take care.